We're going to get the webinar started. I'm just going to ask my colleague Wendy if she can start recording it. So we're going to post it on the internet afterwards. I'm just waiting for Wendy to tell me that she can hear me before we get started. I can still see that people are registering with us. It takes a few minutes to get through
Unmuted
the portal. So just bear with us for 1 second.
We've started recording.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. I think we've got a pretty global spread looking at the list of where people are joining us from. As I said, I'm Jenny. I'm the Director of the Global Fund for Community Foundations. I just want to give you a little overview of how we intend to do the webinar. It will be an hour long. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we decided to do a webinar on this topic and why we find it particularly interesting. Then I'll hand over to Jeff Yost with the Nebraska Community Foundation, who will talk about the pretty developed state of their affiliate funds there in Nebraska. And then we'll whiz across the other side of the world down to South Africa, where we will hear from Johanna Hendricks from the West Coast Community Foundation in South Africa, where the foundation is just getting started with a community funds strategy. So we're going to have a very established example, and then we're going to have a startup example. Just a technical question. Wendy will explain to us how you can ask questions. Wendy, shoot.
So everybody is going to be on mute for the duration of the webinar, but we don't want you to feel voiceless. So if you have a comment or a question in the GoToWebinar control panel, which should be on the right of your screen, you'll see a section that says questions. So if you have something to say, we'd appreciate if you could type it in there, and Jenny will then be notified. So just to keep things moving, we'll do it like that.
Great, thank you. And as I said before, the webinar is being recorded, so if you miss anything or want to share it with people, we will make it available on our website. And the presentations that Jeff and Johanna are making will also be available. And they've both also very generously shared some additional resources and information that you might find useful, which we'll also make sure you have access to after the webinar. So let me just say a few words about this topic. I think those of us working in the community philanthropy space really value the importance of the local aspect of it, of connecting local resources with local activists, with local engagement, with local citizens. But I think it's easy to talk about local and actually mean something that doesn't often look that local. Some of your community foundations around the world work across very large geographic areas with lots of scattered communities in them. And we've noticed over the last few years that this sense of sort of how you can get more local with your community philanthropy work has started to play out in different forms in different parts of the world. Now, in the United States, there has been a very active and dynamic conversation going on for the last 10 years or so amongst a group of community foundations and grassroots grant makers who make up the Rural Development Philanthropy Network, who are particularly interested in looking at how community philanthropy can be a mechanism for reaching people who might lie beyond the reach of government or other kinds of philanthropies. In Kenya, the Kenya Community Development Foundation has also, as part of its endowment building strategy, emphasized the role of communities building their own endowment funds, mobilizing their assets, and at a local level starting to harness and leverage resources. Similarly, in Russia, the emergence of what are called rural funds in very rural areas where there's not much sense of hope. People who can have left, and so using community philanthropy as a mechanism for reaching people as a way of mobilizing them. It's been very important. And in Haiti, the Haiti Community Foundation Initiative, which is just getting going over the last, it's been in planning for the last 5 years, is also looking at a structure that combines both a national aspect and community level funds. So this type of work is starting to pop up in different parts of the world. And I think some of the questions that are similar, even though the context might be different, are around these dilemmas of how do you get people engaged in their own development? How do you start talking about local philanthropy in its most local forms? How do you reach people who might be beyond the reach of foundations who are working nationally or even regionally? And how do you mobilize, how do you use the idea of a place-based approach to mobilize people and to mobilize resources and assets? And finally, how can building community philanthropy also act as the tool for community development? So those are some of the things that we were looking at when we started to think about drawing together this webinar. I'm not going to say anything more right now. I'm going to hand over to Jeff Yost for him to talk about the work in Nebraska. I will be keeping an eye on questions as they come in, so please send them. You don't need to wait for Jeff to have finished or Johanna to finish to send your questions. But let me hand over to Jeff right now. We may have to unmute, yes. Jeff, I've just unmuted you.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. It's morning here in Nebraska. It's afternoon where lots of other folks are, so good day. Jenny, thanks for having us. And I've had the pleasure of being connected to Jenny and the Global Fund for several years, and I just have so much admiration for the great work that so many people are doing around the world. So thank you all for doing that, and it's certainly an honor to be able to share some of what we're doing and hopefully some of what we've learned. Jenny really asked me to talk about 5 pieces today. Really the why of our work, why we approached it this way, some of our principles within that context, some of our experiences, both good and bad, how we've tried to encourage broader participation, and then Jenny already made reference to the Rural Development Philanthropy Framework, but I'll try to integrate a little bit into how we've used that and asset-based community development and other practices and other, scientific-based pieces out there in terms of building our system. So Wendy, will you be advancing slides for me?
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to check on that. So I just want to start with a little bit of background on Nebraska. Nebraska is a really young place. It was, we're just going to have our 150th state anniversary in 2017. So Nebraska, in terms of not indigenous people, people have, only settled Nebraska, a century ago. So Nebraska is a young place, and we're still learning lots. Nebraska is right in the middle of the United States. We're a long ways from major population centers. Many people think of it as flyover country. And that's, of course, created some interesting dynamics over the years. Probably the most important one is that ever since we settled these places, we've had an outmigration of people. And outmigration has been the greatest economic threat to the future of Nebraska for a long time. So our whole system is based upon the idea of how do you stem the tide of outmigration and how do you attract people toward wanting to be a part of the places where they live and work. So that leads us to this slide that's on the screen, which is really our theory of change around community development, and it's that strong progressive communities can only be built and sustained by the people who live and work there. Anybody else coming to town, any expert, should be really careful about what they're doing, and their role is to help. But ultimately, community dynamics and the community's self-fulfilling prophecy has to be built and sustained by the people that live and work there. So we have an incredibly decentralized system, which has been interesting to build over the years, but I think is It's a powerful community development tool. So you can go to the next one. And again, this is within a Nebraska context, so I don't know how much of it applies to where you are or not, but please feel free to take, what's valuable and use it, and the other stuff that doesn't apply to your context, don't. But that's what we've tried to build in Nebraska is a system and an institution and a theory of change that makes sense for Nebraska and Nebraska's circumstances. And what we found is that for a long time we were encouraging young people in particular, but we were encouraging lots of people, that they were going to have a brighter future someplace else. So our community development practice is all about building places where people want to be, and we're really in the people attraction business. So that slide really sums that up. Next one, please. So what we've worked through is what we think are 4 key pieces of building out those magnetic hometowns. A collective vision of the future that's really community-based, and there was a lot of participation that went into putting that vision together. So it wasn't just a few people that got together in a room. It's lots of community conversation to come up with that vision. Within that context, then, not a hierarchical system, but very much a distributed leadership system. So lots and lots of people are helping to get that done, because we really believe that people will invest in what they help build. So distributed leadership's a big piece of that. Money's important, but one of the things that we really think is important is it's money with flexibility associated with it, and that's why we use the word discretionary, is the more money that can be raised, that in fact how that money is allocated and invested is determined locally, that's really a key leadership development tool, because leaders become leaders by leading, which is usually the opportunity to practice. It's making decisions, evaluating those decisions, doing a little better the next time. And then finally, citizen engagement. And what are all the different ways that we can engage people in giving their time, talent, and treasure back to their hometown? So that's kind of that little formulaic piece there. Go ahead. And these are some of the principles that we've used, and I've already referenced some of these. But the first one, and probably the most important, is change, and change that sticks happens along the lines of relationships. We're convinced that people do things because people they know and trust ask them to. So it's not just about good ideas. It has to be a combination of good ideas and trusting relationships in order to help change happen and help change stick. We very much have a theory of abundance here, and we've found lots of different ways of quantifying that over time in terms of how people give their time and the generosity in which they do that. We've done lots of work around this thing called the intergenerational transfer of wealth here in that's happening in the northern Great Plains and throughout North America. But again, it all comes down to leadership, and that community leadership is key, and that's the thing that we're constantly trying to tap into. And people don't do things just because they were told to. People do things because they've ultimately discerned that's what's in their self-interest and what's in their mutual interest. So lots of these pieces. The fourth bullet down, we do lots and lots of skills building work. And much of that is within the context of peer learning. We're convinced that adults learn experientially as opposed to just people telling them what to do and how to do it. So we're in this constant process of helping people to learn and grow and evolve both their community development skills as well as their confidence in doing that, and really understanding that community building is a team game. And then finally, the last bullet is that all of these relationships have to be reciprocal. Our whole system is a willing partner system. So there's 532 places in Nebraska. We don't have any interest in having an affiliated fund in each one of those. We're interested in having affiliated funds in the places that are interested in being partners with us. And I think that becomes really important in the sense that using a tool like Philanthropy, you can't make anybody do anything. All you can do is motivate and inspire people. So we have this whole system that's based upon reciprocity. Next slide, please. So this is a map of Nebraska. It's about 800 kilometers from corner to corner, so it's a pretty big place. There's 1.8 million people. As I mentioned, there's 532 different communities. As you can see, there's affiliated funds that serve about half of those. So some of those are community-based affiliated funds, some of those are donor-advised funds, some of those are organizations like schools or hospitals or libraries that are doing community benefit work in their place. So there's lots of different types of affiliated funds. And again, it's all about those people in that place deciding what they want for their future. And our role is to help them get there. Our role isn't to say, do A, B, and C. I mean, we know a fair amount of how to do what we're doing, and we've got a fair amount of experience. But ultimately, if we believe that the only people that can build and sustain a community are the people that live and work there, I'm not convinced that what matters is what I tell people to do. It ultimately matters what people decide is in their best interest. So in many times, we're helping to facilitate that conversation, share information. Community leaders from a neighboring community may go and share their experience. These are all things about creating an attraction strategy for people wanting to do this work. Go ahead and go to the next one, please. So this is just a quick summary. I just wanted to point out a couple things. The third bullet down, we have about 1,600 volunteer community leaders that serve as affiliated fund leaders. And these people donate an enormous amount of time and energy toward doing this and doing this well. This is all within the context of one corporation, the Nebraska Community Foundation. All of these affiliated funds are basically independent operating units within that. We've focused lots of time and effort in getting people to not only make current gifts, but as you can see, planned gifts. So there's now nearly 300 planned gifts that have been confirmed on behalf of these places. And what that is somebody making a commitment within their estate planning that they're going to make a gift upon their death. I think those are important commitments for the future. About 37,000 gifts that have been made to these affiliated funds in the last 5 years. Almost 9,000 of those were made to affiliated funds last year. So we're really delighted with the number of people that are in the habit of giving. And again, we have lots of metrics around repeat donors, new donors. We know lots of things about people because, again, change happens along the lines of relationships. We want to know what people have done or haven't done as we're talking with them or we're sharing that information with those affiliated fund leaders in those places to help, build out that relationship and really to discern what people want, where they want to put their energy and resources. So next slide, please. So this comes back, and I think this really begins to elicit the system that we've tried to put in place to help people build themselves, to help people build their skills, and to do both of those things in terms of helping people to engage lots and lots of their friends and neighbors in helping to collectively build their place. So Jenny mentioned the Rural Development Philanthropy Framework. Actually, you can look at the Nebraska Community Foundation website, and under Programs and Research, you can look at something called Rural Development Philanthropy. There are pieces of RDP embedded in this. There are pieces of asset-based community development that I've referenced, that I know Johanna's going to reference as we go through this. And this is just a real, what we've tried to learn about, what are the skills and behaviors that we can help community volunteers to become more effective at in terms of those people building their place. So again, this isn't about the Nebraska Community Foundation because we're interested in pushing power out the door. And mission fulfillment for the Nebraska Community Foundation is lots and lots of communities having a better psychology about their future, because what people believe in, they're going to redouble their efforts for, they're going to invest their time, talents, and treasure. That's where they're really going to, commit themselves to. So as you can see by looking through those skills and behaviors, a lot of these things aren't traditional leadership pieces. I mean, it starts with listening. Any good community organizer knows they need to go to where the energy is, and you don't know where the energy is by telling people what to do. We know where the energy is by listening to people and understanding what they want. We help organize groups and facilitate them in order to get at that collective vision, for instance, or in order to figure out, okay, who is a group that's not at the table that we need to bring to the table? How do we have that bigger tent approach? Many people relate their work to stories, so we've tried to become better at storytelling over time. Most people don't want to show up for sort of dour things. They want to show up and have fun. So we're big at hosting and celebrating. We want to be optimistic. We want to be humble. And ultimately, the last two bullets, we want to help build mutual understanding and mutually beneficial outcomes. Equity matters a lot. And the American dream, at least in our context, is the growth and sustainability of the middle class. And certainly we've seen lots of economics change over time, which has put the middle class at risk. Much of what we're doing is trying to help to build and sustain a middle class in many of these places. So again, mutual understanding and mutually beneficial outcomes. And finally, the idea that, you know, we're not poor and we're not going to do community development based upon a deficit model. So constantly challenging assumptions about readily available local capacity. And that might be around people's time or people's skills or people's talent or people's energy or the wealth that they possess or any of the community capitals that we have. So with that, let's see if I have any time left. Hopefully that was about 15 minutes, Jenny, and I'll be delighted to take some questions if that comes along. But thanks for the opportunity to share this.
Thanks, Jeff. That was brilliant. What we'll do is we'll turn over to Johanna in a second. I just wanted to kind of reinforce a few of the points and that you made so well. Just to restate that the Nebraska Community Foundation is not itself a grant-making foundation, that its raison d'etre is really, as Jeff said, to push power out of the door and help facilitate these more local level affiliate funds so that the sort of the philanthropy, the community development happens at a much more local level. And it struck me, Jeff, that the almost last slide where you had those numbers of 220 affiliate funds, $107 million, $124.7 million reinvested in the last 5 years, that if you're running a community foundation in another part of the world, these seem like numbers from another planet. And then you take us on to the last slide where all of those key words, which I think are really important for community philanthropy organizations working in Central and Eastern Europe and in Africa and Asia and Latin America, that all these functions around listening and facilitating and building trust, telling stories, this is very much the bread and butter of the community philanthropy field as it's developing in other parts of the world. So this idea that you've got a model which allows that much money to sort of flow, and yet the principles and values which are very much about strengthening communities, taking asset-based approaches, challenging assumptions, I think really kind of pulls us all back to a discourse that is more familiar to us, perhaps. And so maybe on that note, I can unmute Johanna. I see is still there. Let me unmute Johanna, and she can tell us a little bit about starting this work from really the other end of the spectrum. You'll see that the figures are very different, but a lot of the words that she will say will be very much the same. So Johanna, please tell us about West Coast Community Foundation.
Thank you, Jenny. Much appreciated for the opportunity to be here. This is a wonderful opportunity to share what we are busy doing. And I will start with who is WCCF. We have a long relationship with the Global Fund for Community Foundations, and they have promoted a lot of our work that we have done. The foundation has started in 2001, and it is in the region of the Western Cape Province in South Africa, and we are serving the West Coast, but not limited to the West Coast only. We are a small grant maker in our local community, and we have 5 staff members and a board that serves consecutively a 5-year term. And the foundation has distributed grants, 184 grants to 148 organizations to the value of $90,000, 490 seats. Next slide, please. The foundation has a strategic approach in order to develop community funds. At first, we had started with community foundations because of the desire of the organization to establish local support groups. And unfortunately, it didn't work, and the foundation had to rethink and re-strategize. So the foundation decided to make one strategic outcome to establish community funds. And from that, we have realized that this is an important aspect. We have done a lot of research, but we also realized that based on the asset-based community development methodology, we will not be able to really shift or make any changes toward in the community unless we are working directly where the community are at and where the community have the opportunity to make their own decisions in order to restore their own dignity and to have also to fulfill our outcome of working towards self-reliant, thriving communities on the West Coast. Next slide, please. We have been able to discuss this opportunity of affiliated funds. Affiliated funds have been a very new word to us, to our ears, to our communities. They didn't understand what it was. But as we progressed and educating our communities around what is asset-based community development, the affiliated fund has become an outcome of that work that we have done with our communities. And at present, we have now 2 affiliated funds. It's still very small, but we believe that our communities are passionate people and they struggle to make a difference in their communities. They are at the cold face of what is the situation within their communities, and we believe together with our communities that we are able to help them or facilitate their opportunity to become passionate people with a focus of resources and visibility in their community, making a huge impact in transformation and ultimately become a sustainable community organization or a community, entire community. As Jeff has mentioned, we work with communities that's willing to work with us. Next slide, please. Our communities, we have been able to establish 2 affiliated funds and 3 youth bank funds. We were assisted by numerous partners to help us define what all of this means. And we have Vernon that has assisted us with the youth bank funds. We have derived information from the Nebraska Community Foundation website, and Jeff Yost visited us when he did his research, and we have learned quite a lot from them, and this is our current outcome, and we believe this will grow tremendously as we are both in this opportunity. Thank you. Next slide. This is the area where we work, and as you can see where the little hand are, they define in which communities we have been providing grants to those communities. And we have now, as I said, mentioned 184 grantees that we have provided grants to. And WCCF, can I have the next slide, please? WCCF has also started with their own fund development. Within the organization, we have realized in order to be a strong community driver, we need to secure also funds for ourselves in order to promote what we believe will be a future opportunity for our communities. At present, we have given our communities an opportunity to establish their own funds. But yet in all of this, we still have to build leadership. We still have to do simultaneously educating our communities, and we still have to work with them. So we believe that as a community foundation, that our communities have the ability to leverage their existing resources and assets and take responsibility for their own growth. And that is what WCCF is always promoting and getting into when we discuss community fund building with our communities. Next slide, please. We believe that everybody is involved in a community. Every child, every grown-up is a donor. And we believe that every small contribution can become big. And therefore, we say that we enable our community members to talk to each other. And as we are speaking, our first community fund is in the progress of defining their objectives and their goals in order to register with the foundation. And we also say people give to people. This principle applies to the biggest donors and to the smallest donation or service in our community as well. We believe also that this is an opportunity for communities to come together, where communities are restored, that community build their relationships, and opportunities are created. This is also a platform where communities have the opportunity to create economic growth, also to bring themselves in order to give and to build their community. In the rural areas, there's always this challenge where people migrate to the cities, and our communities lose a lot of resource and expertise. But now lately, quite a lot of professionals have come to the foundation in order to connect again with their local communities, which is a very positive aspect of building community funds, and this is a very good opportunity for them to get involved with. So thank you very much. Very much. Next slide. Is there one?
I think that's your last slide.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
before we open up, thank you so much, Johanna. Could I just ask you to tell us a little bit more? I mean, looking at the map, you can see how spread out the area is that the West Coast Community Foundation works across. And again, this idea, if you only have one office in one town across this big area, how do you make people feel connected to the foundation? But could you explain just in a couple of minutes why that particular fund in Rivet Castile, the Castile Fund, came about? What was it that they wanted to do separately from the Community Foundation? And while you're just thinking about that, I can see that Janet Moyo from the Kenya Community Development Foundation is also on the webinar. So if she can, Janet, could you send me a message to see if to say whether we can unmute you and you can just speak for a couple of minutes about where the Kenyan community funds fit into this picture. And then after that, we've got a few questions starting to roll in from participants. But Johanna, could you tell us a little bit about that particular fund that you're working on now and why you think this is a suitable strategy for West Coast Community Foundation?
This fund has started with, when we introduced at our non-profit annual conference, we introduced the concept of community funds, and people were interested, and they came to the foundation. We had a discussion about how this kind of thing are able to work in our community. The leader that has approached us went back to the community, had a discussion about the entire scenario about community funds, and asked the community if they're willing to work with her in order to establish a fund. The community was willing, and WCCF were contacted to go in and to give a presentation of what we envisage a fund should look like, but with the understanding that whatever the community decide, that is what the foundation will proceed in and moving forward into. What happened was we had 3 consecutive community meetings, which was attended by the local community. The community has, in the second meeting, they have pledged their support to the fund financially, and now at this point, tonight, they are going to have a community meeting where they will define what will be the role and what will be the objectives of this fund for that specific community. The community felt that they didn't have the connection outside, but they do have the necessary resources within themselves in order to establish a fund. And that came to be because of the training that was provided to them through asset-based community development over a period of time. And people's paradigms have shifted because of that. So they think differently, and they're more energized and willing to work towards their own self-sustainability.
Great, thank you so much. So that idea of being really local, to getting things going at the really local level. I'm going to unmute Janet. I hope she's there. Janet, are you there? Janet, can you hear us? Okay, no, that looks too tricky. So in that case, we will mute Janet and we will start going turning to some of the questions. So please continue to send your questions in. And these questions came in when Jeff was speaking, but I think it would be good to have a perspective from both of you. So this question that's come in from Nora Murad, who's involved with the Dahlia Foundation, Dahlia Association in Palestine, asking this question about if the Nebraska Community Foundation doesn't give grants, how does it justify its own costs to its donors? And I guess that also linked with what is the identity of the Nebraska Community Foundation. And Nora's just added saying it's hard enough to get people to give grant-making funds through community foundations because they normally want to give directly. So how does Nebraska Community Foundation deal with this sort of layers of infrastructure, if you like? Jeff, can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can certainly try, and it's not an easy dance, I think, is the first part to start. I mean, what we've tried to do is frame ourselves up as a value-added partner. So we're gonna help community leaders to go above and beyond where they can go themselves. So a part of our revenue stream is a management fee off gifts that have been made, whether they're pass-through gifts or whether they're endowed gifts. And then we do raise money for the Nebraska Community Foundation itself. And to a large extent, the rationale around a lot of that is we're helping communities to really focus on the future. I mean, we've really framed the Nebraska Community Foundation up as it's one of the few organizations in Nebraska, possibly the only one, that's exclusively focused on the future. We're not a relief organization, so it's very much an investment in what is possible. So I made reference to this massive transfer of wealth. We know that people are very generous. We know that lots of things in Nebraska work well. well, if all those things are true, we shouldn't have an out-migration of young people, and yet we do. So we've really tried to dig into the root cause associated with much of that. And that's something that donors have been attracted to supporting over time, not just trying to work on the relief piece of this, but really trying to work on some of the root cause. And you know, much of it comes back to people being hopeful in the future that they're a part of. So it's a question that doesn't lend itself to a soundbite, and I apologize that I don't have one for you.
Thank you, but I think this aspect of focusing specifically kind of on the future, and I guess you're operating in a context where you have other systems and capacities in place, and community foundations in more developing contexts might find themselves torn with an essential dilemma about saving for the future. But again, it's such a hugely important piece of it is who are the institutions that are thinking about the future, not just next week, next year, next 10 years, next 30 years, next 50 years. That's been something that I think it comes across very clearly in the way that the Nebraska Community Foundation has articulated its niche. Johanna, how does it look for you where you are? Because obviously you are still dealing with a lot of stuff that's going on around. I mean, you're involved in providing training for government officials and making grants and doing all sorts of things. The Community Foundation in West Coast is really still playing an important role in building civil society. So how do you see these affiliate funds fitting in, and how will the Community Foundation seek to raise funds for them? How do you see this evolving, and can you tell yet at this stage?
Jenny, at this point we have put in place a policy that speaks to the specific aspect of charging an administration fee for the foundation to administer these funds. As Jeff has mentioned, that becomes part of the long-term process that you get involved in. And that is what is currently in our minds when it comes to setting up these things. This is a long-term perspective, but looking at where we are currently, we need to look at also the different core areas that we are building our community and educating them around what is it that they have, their existing resources, linking those partners together in order to understand what the development context is for our region. And we envisage that this thing have quite the ability to work, not only looking at what has been accomplished by the Nebraska Community Foundation, but having a future perspective to go that route, but looking also at where we are currently and the ability of this organization in order to move towards or into that direction in order to make things work for this organization. We will still have to raise funds for the organization to do capacity building in order to build our endowment. That will still happen. But juggling these things cost is quite energy. You need a lot of energy to do that because you have to do you have to have the one part of capacity building and supporting communities, and then you also have to steer and direct communities into the future, looking ahead and securing a little piece of endowment, educating the communities about the importance of saving a little bit for the future.
So we have Jeff, who's dancing in Nebraska, and Johanna, who is juggling in South Africa. But yes, Jeff, did you want to add to that?
I did want to add just one small piece, which is, again, we've built a system in Nebraska that made sense in Nebraska. So what I would encourage each of you to do is to really think about, you know, what are the challenges and what are the opportunities in your particular place, and build a system that makes the most sense in that context. And especially when you're getting started, to think about what are one or two things that we're uniquely positioned to do that nobody else can do. So I wouldn't try to be all things to all people. I would try to think about, where are you uniquely positioned to add some value, even if it is in a fairly narrow spectrum initially?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think also that it's the extent to which a community foundation, which is connected to the smaller type of affiliate funds, although they're not small in your case, Jeff, but that idea of creating a space that's greater than the sum of its parts. So a movement of affiliate funds facilitated by a community foundation acting, being able to sort of amplify that voice is much more powerful than a series of one-off initiatives. Okay, we've got questions flowing in now. Various people, so there's one question around how youth are engaged, and I can see both these pictures that we're looking at now have pictures of young people. We've got 15 minutes, and I've got about 3 more questions I want to get through. But Johanna, do you want to talk a little bit about the youth piece in West Coast Community Foundation, because that has been hugely important for you, hasn't it? Engaging young people in multiple ways through the Community Foundation.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. The youth banks has started out with Vernon, that connected with Jeremy Marman, our program officer, in order to establish youth banks. The youth bank initiative has been introduced to our communities, first at the school level, where 15 youth have been recruited, and then they will raise funds in the community. They will receive the necessary education, but then they will personally raise the funds with the community members. That funds will then be granted to the community, but they will run the entire process. We have been successful in doing our first initiative in 2012, but we need to now work with our groups in order to raise more funds. 2 of our youth bank have identified 2 specific projects to which they will make a grant. So the leadership opportunity for them has been, they have developed the leadership, they have been introduced in the process of grant making, so they will do their own grant making process with the advice and support of the foundation. And we have, in 2013, we have now a group of youngsters that is interested to establish a youth bank in Elandsbaai, one of the smaller communities. So we are going to first do an asset-based community development workshop with them in order to understand and to shift their paradigm from a needs-based to asset-based approach. And then we will introduce the youth bank. So this has been very it has been great for our youth, and they want to go further with this, so we will support the whole entire process.
Great, thank you so much. And I think this idea of almost vertical and horizontal communities, so you've got geographically based communities, but also communities of young people. And I think one of the sort of striking characteristics about community foundations and community philanthropy in so many parts of the world is the extent to which young people can bring these new mindsets into thinking about structural issues, assets, what resources we have, and really as a mechanism for mobilizing people who might feel somewhat disconnected from things going on around them. There are 2, I'm trying to cluster these questions here, so there are 2 questions here. Well, actually, there are several people asking about the asset-based community development. Johanna, can you talk a little bit about that? And maybe, Jeff, you could add, well, actually, maybe we'll start with Jeff. When you talk about asset-based community development, who have been your sources of support and mentorship in that regard? Because I know that Johanna and her colleagues all were very involved with the Cody Institute in Canada, but where has that influence come from with you and your colleagues within the Nebraska Community Foundation, Jeff?
So I was exposed to asset-based community development about 20 years ago, and it was the work of John McKnight and Jody Kretzman from Northwestern at the time. So I've been in and around that context and that world for a long time. So I'd have to say that people like John McKnight and Jody Kretzman and Tom Moskler, others that have been doing this work in many places in many different ways have been real influencers. The people at the Cody Institute are fantastic. I got to spend some time with those folks this summer. So for those of you that have had the opportunity to work with the Cody Institute folks, please do. If you haven't, I would encourage you to be in touch with them, because that is just a remarkably good organization. The thing that I'll say about the asset-based community development that I like the most is one of the ways it's framed up is what you want to do is maximize what we would refer to in North America as a potluck dinner before you go to a cafeteria. So a potluck dinner is when everybody brings some food and some drink and whatever. They bring whatever they have to share with the group, and then only later do you order out or have somebody do it for you. But that's, of course, the essence of community building is sharing and supporting one another. It's communal living. The other piece that I'll say about asset-based community development that I really like is it isn't about creating dependency within that place. It's really helping people in a neighborhood or a small place to become more independent. And you do that by asking the question, what can we do for ourselves? What can we do with a little bit of help? And what do we have to do together? So in a place like Nebraska where it snows, we would the illustrations you would use for that are a shovel, a snowblower, and a snowplow. But it's interesting to think about how you would illustrate that in other places in terms of how that works. So the ABCD stuff is profoundly important as it relates to our theory of change in our work.
Right. Thank you very much. In fact, we as a global fund did some work with the Cody Institute a few years back. In fact, Jeff came to the meeting where we were discussing the extent to which asset-based community philanthropy, that the natural home for it are organizations like community foundations, because it's one thing to mobilize a community, but then where do you start to park some of this energy and interest? And that was one of the questions that came up from one of the participants, is how does one maintain the energy on the ground? And I guess, I don't know, Johanna, you're sort of early on this stage, it's very much a startup, so there might be excitement about a community fund. So how do you intend to keep the energy in place? And Jeff, how have you managed to keep the energy going in Nebraska, where people have come together, said great idea, and then 6 months later, are they still thinking it's a great idea? Johanna, do you want to say a word about that?
It's consistency, consistent communication, and building those relationships it's vital, because you need to be energized yourself in order to bring over that energy to the community, and also be willing to help them, be there to help. If they need to talk to you or to need to talk through something, be available to those communities, which makes it, I mean, when looking at where I am at the moment, I'm very excited. I would have loved to be with them tonight to have that meeting. But yet, it's so important to get the word out there that our communities have the ability to help themselves, and they are willing to do it. We must believe that they are willing to do it.
Yeah.
Jeff,
do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would second all of that. That's just spot on. Two ways that it's manifested itself for the Nebraska Community Foundation is being willing to have the discipline to not do things for people, but having the discipline to wait to see if they'll do it for themselves. And then sometimes they don't. And our system is okay with that. We've figured out ways for community groups or projects or endowment building or whatever, if there isn't a critical mass in that place yet to get something done, we're okay with those efforts going into a dormant state. So it's what Joanna said, the way I would say it is patient and tenacious.
Right. Well, I think that's true, isn't it? So so it's also knowing that that it's okay. You can't push at something if it's not going to work right now. It doesn't mean it might not work, some point down the line. Patient and tenacious. Yes, okay, so I'm whizzing through the questions now, which I think I'm trying to, lots of people saying the thank you, this is all very interesting, asking about asset-based approaches. Have either of you, or Jeff, have you, because Johanna's just getting started, but has matching funding played a role at all in getting affiliate funds off the ground? Or would that look too much like, pushing it too much on your side? Have you had an experience of using matching funding to get community funds off the ground, or has it been more a question of people hearing that there's one 30 miles down the road and they would like something like that too?
It is a combination of both. From a getting started standpoint, it's more about a community 30 miles down the road having one, and we want to have one too. And I also want to be really careful about people doing these things for the right reasons. So we've tried to be pretty disciplined about when we use financial catalysts like a challenge grant or matching funds. So many times we'll use it to try to get community leaders to go to a next level of sophistication. So as opposed to using it to get the funds started, maybe that's when we would use it to help them start to build endowments.
Right. And what kind of evidence would you need to see? There's some questions around how do you kind of who maps the community interest early on for it to be worth your while to get this going? Obviously it has to be more than a couple of people that come into your office to say we want one of these. So what's the evidence that you need to pursue this?
We do have a readiness checklist, and we're happy to share those tools with people. So we have a whole series of things that we've learned over time, and we've tried to document those and figure out how do you ask the right questions, and how do you have the right evidence, which is different than people just answering the question correctly. And for us, it's as much around a number of people being committed to this happening as opposed to just one or two spark plugs.
Right.
So that's, so those are, if that's helpful, I'm happy to share some of those tools, and they're reasonably simple. And then with other things like pretty significant endowment building efforts, we have a whole different set of tools associated with assessing affiliated fund readiness to take on a challenge like that.
Right, right. So that's something that you've managed to kind of take into the level of a sort of a science of it, or a checklist of knowing, not getting carried away by a nice idea. But Johanna, what's been your experience? I mean, getting this initial fund up and running, do you feel, I know you're in very early days, and I should say, Johanna, I visited her in July, and they were just getting the documents for this idea off the ground, and so they're very new into this whole affiliate fund thing. But just in a couple of words, Johanna, what have you learnt so far about readiness for this kind of a fund? What were the drivers that made you think that this was a good idea in Rebet Castile?
What we have picked up was the importance of waiting for the community and give them the opportunity to decide what it is that they want, and to really listen to their situation, where they find themselves, and then asking the right appreciative questions in order to get the necessary conversation going. And people sit with that information within them, and not always sharing that information. But when they come together as a collective, then everybody hears what the other one thinks, and that makes it much better for them to engage with what are the things about the entire community that needs to be looked at. What are the issues that they have to deal with? So in a collective discussion, a lot of things came out, and a lot of people felt that this is the right kind of vehicle that they need to pursue, because they already had this kind of activity within a few years back where they collected money from the local community. They didn't didn't have the tools or the way in how to formulate the thing and make it a formal community fund, the way we have introduced the type of fund to them. So these kind of things exist in the local communities, and it's a matter of untapping those resources.
So it is the role of the Community Foundation in unlocking some of the, well, channeling some of those good ideas and reflecting back to people that this is actually can be turned into something more strategic. Jeff, did you want to say something quickly before we close up? We're on the half hour now.
I would like to say two things on that one, if I may.
Sure.
One is I would encourage people to not accidentally duplicate existing capacity. So really knowing your place and knowing what's going on and not accidentally duplicating what's happening is really important. The other piece would say I wouldn't start with something that's really hard. I would start with something that's relatively straightforward, because what you're ultimately looking for is just a little bit of traction. So try to take on something that you feel like you can make really good progress on and be able to declare a small amount of success 6 months from now. You know, people want to be a part of something that's progressive and successful. And a lot of the issues that we deal with are really wicked issues, and lots of people have been spending lots of time and money on them for a long time. I would just encourage people to not take on the most difficult thing to start. But, you know, there's lots of good stuff that we can do where we can be successful, get a little bit of traction, get the people around the table motivated and inspired, and then they can aspire to a lot more with their next thing.
Right, brilliant, thank you. So wise words from Jeff there, closing up the webinar. I think I heard go where the energy is, the patience and the tenacity, but I think there's also an element of the joy and fun. Actually, as Jeff said, it's not all about the big, you know, that's the beauty of working locally, is people's connection with their place. We've come to the end of our hour. I would like to thank you so much, Jeff and Johanna, for joining us today and telling us about your work. This webinar has been recorded, so it will be available on our website. We will also try and produce a written version with some of the highlights of the conversation. And where there are questions that I can see that we didn't manage to answer them all, we will try and get them answered, and we will share some additional materials that Jeff and Johanna have both kindly shared with us. And I hope that this can be the first in a number of conversations around this particular topic, because it does seem very current and very much of interest, judging by today's webinar. So thank you everybody for joining us, and for Wendy helping to organize us, and Jeff and Johanna once again. You all have a good rest of your day, or beginning of your day, where it is. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a great day.